This week on Around the Coin, Mike Townsend, Brian Roemmele, and Faisal Khan recap the last 25 shows and provide life tips that you can use to discover new opportunities and engage with awesome people online.
All right, guys, good morning. Today is a special show. It is episode 25 of Around the Coin. Brian, Faisal, and we decided we're going to take a bit of a unique approach this week, and rather than dive deep into a particular subject like we usually do, we'll give a bit of a recap into why we started the show, what it's done for us, where we want to take it, and then how we can get more listeners involved, and maybe try some new things. So we'll kind of just play it by ear this show and see where it goes, guys. How's that sound? How you guys doing?
Good morning, and I'm doing great.
And good morning.
Happy birthday to America.
That's right.
Yesterday, yeah. So it's a interesting holiday break here for all of us.
Yep.
And it's been a quiet week on the payments front as well.
It sure has.
Yes.
Yeah. Nothing too big.
So maybe I'll get started with the question to Mike. Mike, since you're the so-called creator of the show, of this podcast, why don't you give us a little bit of background, why you wanted to do this, how did the idea come about, and more importantly, how did you choose your two co-hosts?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, how did this happen?
Yeah, what's
How did I
funny
get
is
involved?
when I wrote this piece on how to create a podcast. I titled it "How to Integrate Podcasting into Your Life." And when I was writing it, I realized it's a huge point in how you find your team, where the moment of conception comes from, why even decide to do one, right? And I researched. I couldn't remember at first, but I dug deep into one of the email strands we had, and it came from a Quora post of nothing else. And it was a thread with Brian, Faisal, and I. And I think Brian suggested it. No, Faisal suggested, well, we should do a podcast. And then Brian, of course, says, oh, yeah, I'm totally in. And I was like, look, we have to make this happen, right? If this thread disappears and no podcast comes from it, it would be a travesty. So picked a name, ran with it, just basically did everything, got off the ground as quick as possible, set up the site, got everyone, make sure everyone had mics, and just said, let's do it. What works? Faisal's in Pakistan, so it's important to pick a time each week where everyone can just expect to do it. And we just rolled with it. It was one of those things, I think the mentality was, let's just try it. If we like it and we enjoy it, we get something out of it, keep doing it. If not, no harm done.
And why payments? Why not something else? Why not science? Because I believe on Quora you were following pretty much quite a few topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think.
What drove you to payments? That's always been my question.
Yeah, it's Brian. I think you in particular would know that the United States has a lot of opportunity to improve on the payments infrastructure and the whole industry as a whole. So, when you see things like that as an early entrepreneur and you're deciding, where do I go and spend the next 10 years and really learn a ton and be able to contribute a ton back, the payments is particularly interesting because it's so deep, right? So I could spend the next 5 years and continually learn and continually build something in that space that is one day worth $1 billion and helps a billion people. And that was just such a fascinating idea. Now I'm in healthcare, and I'm still using experience from payments. And it's, those two industries I think are unique in that sense, where they're so deep, the problems are so vast that it just, some people just get gravitated towards that. You guys, I'm sure, feel the same thing.
We do. So I have a question that I guess everyone is going to probably want an answer to. How's the growth been since the first episode and now that we're on number 25?
Yeah, sure. So the first,
and not just numbers, growth as.
Yeah. So the first two episodes, I believe, we almost completely wrote them off. We launched it. We tried it. I think, we still had to figure out how editing works. It had no flow at all. Even the introductory voiceover was kind of sketchy. So that was almost like our dry run. And I think it's important for people that are thinking about starting it to just have 2 episodes, get them out of the way, figure out what you're doing, and then call the third one number 1. So on the third episode, we had just about nothing. What I found is bringing people on. We had Mateen Mizzy from Balanced, and we had Brett from Breaking Banks. Like having those guys on really boosts your visibility, but I think it also draws people in repeatedly after they see you, right? You want exposure initially, and then you want to be able to retain that. So I think we've done a pretty good job there.
And viewership, how has that climbed over the weeks?
Collectively now we're sitting at around I believe around a 15% growth, at least 10% growth week after week. But it certainly varies. We'll go up some weeks and down some other weeks. Particularly the mobile payment stuff seems to be the biggest spiker. Some numbers around overall viewership are, let's see here.
I mean, I understand Chris Larson's show with Ripple had a lot of viewership.
Yeah, that was a big one as well. But I believe we get around now maybe 250 total between, we get different viewers on SoundCloud, and they'll stream it from the iTunes podcast, or they'll watch a YouTube show. Some people probably just stick on for the first 10, 15 minutes or skim through it. But we're around 250 to 350 now.
What I find fascinating is a lot of people who are subscribing to the podcast are actually just emailing the podcast to friends. And I've had numerous contacts, people who just get it by email. And I'm like, where did you get that? Well, my friend downloaded it from iTunes and passed it on. So it's interesting. Yeah, interesting how that can really grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our biggest one was Chris Larson. That's right, with Ripple. I think he probably got around probably 500 to 600 plus viewership.
So how have you found? So how have you found it changing your direction in life? How has it impacted your your outlook on payments in the world, if you will?
Yeah. Well, first, before we leave that topic, I'd love to hear why did you guys decide to do it? Right, Faisal, Brian. I mean, your time is valuable. Why give it up to just sit on a show and?
Well, I don't think so. It was about giving it up. I mean, we give a lot of time to Quora as it is, quite a lot of time on Quora. So I was skeptical as to the value a podcast would bring in, because it's more challenging. It's not as easy as just writing an answer that you can edit later on, etc. And and the questions and the topics, and being able to speak with some sense of authority, authentication. And delivery, it's not an easy thing. So I took it as a challenge. And I said, if nothing else, and I'll be very blunt here, it'll do nothing, just increase my profile. So that's the way I looked at it, not knowing what I was getting into. But I'll sum it up. I say, I love it. I absolutely love doing this show.
I must echo what Faisal is saying, and a lot of what you said, Mike, I fully agree with. I mean, my view is, we're all in the business of communication. Every human being on the planet is in a business of communication, and the more we communicate, the more we work that muscle, if you will, the better off we become. I started life as a very inwardly directed nerd. I did not have what anybody would seem to want to call high communication skills. And life forced that out of me, sometimes kicking and screaming. The different challenges in business I've taken made me become a communicator, and particularly in sales, which I happen to think is incredibly powerful for anybody to understand what true selling is about. Because not only are we all communicators, we're all salespeople to some extent, and sometimes not really understanding that. We're selling our significant others on where we're going to go for dinner tonight. We're selling our friends and families on maybe political ideas or philosophical ideas. And this is sales in the very truest essence. That's not where you're twisting somebody's arm to do something they don't want to do. Right. But you're resonating with them, and you're trying to find a way to communicate and to have synergistic responses. The podcast, I mean, I've done radio when I was younger. I mean, when I was in high school, I was actually program director of our radio station out there in New Jersey. And strangely enough, it was the most powerful high school radio station in the country at the time. We were from New Jersey. You can get us all the way up to Massachusetts, all the way down to North Carolina. And I really didn't understand the power of that microphone one time until I did a test. And I was there doing the night shift. And I just ran a little study, I guess. It was a contest, which technically I shouldn't have been doing. As a program director, I should have known better. And we only had 6 lines that were coming into the station. And the contest was to give away a brand new album that really nobody else had. I do not remember the artist, but we had it as a promotional copy. And I was going to give it away the day it was legally able to be released. Long story short, I got probably what we lost count after 700 phone calls for this station. And after that, I called up Arbitron and I asked them if they could just do a little rating of how many listeners we got. And for this little radio station, the average listenership was over 35,000 people.
Wow.
And this was a little high school station. It completely changed my view of things. That helped me become more of a communicator because I wasn't so good on the radio.
Totally.
It was more the technical side. And so that's what this podcast does. It opens up the ability for all of us to communicate. And, basically, my view is you shouldn't really talk about subjects with authority unless you really do have the confidence and knowledge within that subject.
Also,
and, I try to edit myself.
Brian and Faisal, you guys write so much on Quora that people must develop this relationship with you through your words on the screen, but then when you speak behind the mic, I feel like it gives it a whole nother dimension or context, right? So now people actually know who you are in a sense from listening to you, and there's a whole nother channel where if you're going to spend another hour just writing, you almost have diminished returns on all that.
The first time we sort of discussed the idea of a podcast, the only other podcast, and I mean the only other podcast I was listening to just happens to be the Planet Money by NPR.
Sure.
Which is a fantastic podcast. And I was like, wow, this is the competition, so to speak, proverbially speaking. But, I say, how are we going to get there? But, slowly and surely we're there. It's not easy. And I'll tell you, I know so many people, at least half a dozen people I know who attempted to do a podcast just about the same time when we were launching, and they still haven't gotten it off the ground.
Just have to do it. Just move. Just plow forward.
It's easier said than done.
Totally.
Mike, it is. But it is so difficult for some people. The inertia, with some for just putting something together, is a lot. And it's a huge undertaking. Not just in time wise, you have to plan it out. There's a lot that goes on beyond the 1 hour that we spend.
We're all entrepreneurs here, and I think every one of us have winged together businesses just based on our gut instinct. And I don't think I've ever met a successful entrepreneur that just doesn't take the first step. I mean, every journey starts with the first step. They take those steps and they kind of learn it as they move along. The thing that I think that distinguishes the better entrepreneur, the better projects or businesses or whatever, is the humility to be able to know what you can't do and to reach out to those people who have those knowledge sets. And I think that's probably the theme that I learned, fortunately, very young in my life. Most startups, it takes 3 or 4 startups for them to realize, hey, I can't do this all myself. Or maybe the VC shouldn't be the primary person recommending the next guy that I hire. Maybe I need to start using the same gut instincts I have to build this business thus far to find the right people. And, here in our podcast here, I mean, I couldn't have planned to find 2 incredible guys that have this knowledge set. It just fell into place. It felt right, and you move along. And I think that's why we're able to do it. A lot of people have the paralysis of analysis. They'll chart things out forever. They'll figure this out and they go, well, can I really cut that many minutes from my life? And, you just got to just go with your gut, and you see where it leads you.
To that point, I think the reason why it works well with us is that you want a diverse pool of consistent hosts, right? The 3 of us have very different backgrounds, right? We don't all live in the same small town doing the same thing. And I think that gives such a diversity, right? Faisal is over in Pakistan, and you bring such a unique perspective. Yeah. Brian, deep in the industry. Me, I kind of have built a couple startups in it and then work in home healthcare now. So it's a good sort of mixture of experiences, and I think that's what people need when they jump into it, right? Don't just do it with your best friend who has the same experience as you do, because you'll eventually run out of interesting perspectives.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think the fact that we're outside the Silicon Valley echo chamber, and I think it's so immensely important. I think you're seeing the rebellion of that right now with this whole cultural fit narrative that is finally taking hold in the industry. For the last 3 years, I said, you guys, and I mean this collectively with a lot of these startup founders and primarily VCs. When I sit down with a VC and I hear cultural fit, I literally want to get ill. And cultural fit is not just about what somebody looks like, country of origin or whatever. It's just they want to get a group of clones, a group of yes men, a group of groupthink individuals. And I believe that's destructive. So I think part of the message we show is that, first off, our primary audience is the Silicon Valley. For better or for worse, that's our primary group that I've learned from. I mean, I get feedback, and again, they're venture capitalists, they're startup founders. They're saying, "Well, gosh, you're talking about things that we're trying to learn, and it's great. We're informing, we're opening up the audience." But then again, there's people from around the world that we're reaching out to that are seeing sort of a balance of how we see the world. And I think it's because of our diversity. It's because we're not trying to just, carry a flag for one particular item of quote unquote disruption or things of that nature.
Also too, Brian.
Faisal's given me so much information about that part of the world that is absolutely not only timeless, but invaluable. I mean, I talk to people on a consistent basis. And I'm saying, yeah, I learned about this, or this is what's a big hole in that market. It's amazing.
And also too, here's a fact for the listeners is that I think they'd be surprised to learn that Faisal, Brian, and I have never met each other face to face. So all of this has been orchestrated over a Quora and Skype. And, it's not required a face-to-face meeting thus far. I mean, we really look forward to meeting each other at a conference, but it just amazes me when you look at what you can accomplish.
I think we need to thank Adam for it, right?
Yeah.
And Mark's the soul of that place.
But one thing I noticed while doing the podcast is I'm able to sometimes answer questions or scenarios that I just perhaps would not be able to do well maybe in a on Quora. It's easier to just wave your hands behind the mic and just speak out in extemporary talk and just give it out and let it go, rather than looking at a blank space and saying, okay, well, I need to type this answer out. How do I do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. And Mike, you brought up a point about, the narrative that develops by reading your stuff versus how somebody views you after they've met you or you get to hear their voice. And I find it fascinating because I'll have people that have been reading what have written on Quora for years. They said, I had no idea that you were going to speak in this way or present the ideas in that manner. And I think we all have our writing style and we all have our speaking style, and it's fun for people to link those two things up. And I think that's the advantage of podcast. And then a lot of people are shy about it too. I mean, I've worked in the entertainment industry for many years also, and I've not met an entertainer or performer that is not shy before they're in front of a microphone. And I'm talking even some of the most seasoned performers. They're up until the last minute they enter that stage. They're rehearsing, they're trying to get within their zone of confidence. And so communication, no matter how sophisticated you become, you never become to the point of confidence where you're not second guessing yourself. And so to your point about starting podcasts and things of that level, it really doesn't matter how you communicate. It's about the content.
It doesn't matter. Almost a quick aside is that there's an interesting psychological understanding that if you speak one-on-one with someone, there's no sense of audience, right? It's 1v1 back and forth discussion. If you have a group, so say it's one on a group, say you're speaking to 15 people and you can engage visually, you can make eye contact with each of them. That's the most intimidating. And then you have a large group, so say a stage of 1,000 people, then you're not going to make one-on-one engagements with people. So the performer in that case just imagines an infinite sea of people, right? There's not this pressure to perform or engage with people like there is in a small group. So I bet, Brian, that's why, if there's 1 million people listening to this podcast or there's, 1,000, it doesn't really make a difference, right? In a way, it doesn't change our level of nervousness, I'd say.
So Brian and Mike, let me ask you a question. What do you think we've gotten out of this podcast so far?
Well, I can tell you just off the top of my head that I've met some of the most incredible people that either may have had some interest in my postings on Quora, but for better or for worse, again, this is not a scientific study, so I probably chased away more people than I've let in. But I've met some people who I think everybody listening to the podcast would find a familiar name in, and I've been blown away by their insights about what we're saying. You know what even is more interesting? And I noticed this from the entertainment industry too, is that people will read much deeper at times than you could possibly realize. And at some other times, maybe much more surfacey and maybe not quite getting your point. And they're both valid. As far as I'm concerned, I don't expect everybody to analyze our nuggets of wisdom to the nth degree. But it is surprising to have individuals who you would think have so much other things to be doing with their valuable time, saying, wow, I really noticed what you said about this. It was a very nuanced point. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of blowing me away, that they're picking up the nuances. And that started with Quora. That's kind of one of the addictive processes with Quora is I'm known for dropping subtle and not very subtle things in my writings. And the very, very subtle. They're very subtle.
Like not being able to tell us a name, right?
Yeah. Here's this high profile person I met with that I'm not able to speak about their name, but it rhymes with Barack Obama.
Something like that. So the thing that I find interesting is that when you kind of interact with your audience in that manner, they actually they want to have that interaction. It's my view anyway. And some of the things we've all said in this podcast. I'll get a feedback saying, well, what exactly did Faisal mean by that? And I go, link up with Faisal and he'll give you the insight, but I'll give you my view. And so words are always open for interpretation. But I think the meaning and intent seem to be more obvious even over cultural lines when you're speaking. So I think Brian, people can kind of really get the impression.
Brian, what's your sort of business take on it? Do you use Quora to charge people for an hourly rate on the phone and consulting? Do you look at it from more of a self-promotion platform to get into business deals or invest in companies? What's your sort of strategy, and what do you hope to get out of not only podcasting, but just putting yourself all over Quora and podcasting? What's the success? What do you go home thinking? Great, I just did this thing, right? I closed 5 hours of consulting, billing, or
I maniacally rub my hands together. I tell you, this is going to be a big letdown. I have absolutely no agenda other than to try to share knowledge and indirectly also to help guide people not to go down the dark alley that I know there's the dead end. And it really is something I absolutely is firmly entrenched in my psyche, and I'm not going to change from it. And that is, I have been very, very fortunate in my life. And a lot of the people who have come out of the woodwork and have said, hey, don't turn there. When I was younger, I would say, screw off, I'm going to turn there. And when you hit the wall, and you hit the wall again, either you keep doing that the rest of your life, or you kind of around, you say, hey, there's incredible people, maybe I should start listening. And that advice over the years, and countless people, all of my clients I've worked with, thousands of business owners I've met with in my sales life, all of it contributed to it. So part of what Quora represented to me and this podcast is sort of returning that. Now, what does that wind up doing? I don't know. When I first started writing on Quora, I just wanted to state my opinion about a few things, and in my domain experience was primarily. So
you must want a piece, though, right? If someone wants to bring you on as an advisor, do you just not entertain that and say, I'm not interested in any sort of business relationship?
I have almost countless business relationships because of Quora, and a growing number because of just people listening to the podcast. A lot of times, my door is always open to anybody. I entertain anybody contacting me and interacting. I try to find time for everybody I can. It's not always like I can find as much time as I'd like, but it's not like oh, you want to talk to me? Here's my billable hours. There's some people who are doing exceedingly well in business who I've given a great deal of time for and have never compensated me. So be it, and some of my ideas being executed out there, absolutely clearly, my ideas, and that's fine. Sometimes it's just amazing to see the things that come from your subconscious, your mind, the greater brain, whatever, just being executed. Maybe that's payment in and of itself. But other times I'm absolutely floored that I'll be spending a little time talking and all of a sudden a check shows up. I've been absolutely floored.
But it sounds like if $1 million in checks showed up, you'd still be doing the same thing, right? It sounds like you're not driven by the dollars.
Well, I don't think you can be. I've never known a truly successful individual. And that doesn't mean just financially successful. It means holistically successful. They're happy individuals. They're loving their life. There are a lot of very wealthy people right now in the Silicon Valley that just hate their life. And I can tell you how you can tell. Take a look at them. Really observe them. Tell me if they love their life, or do they just love getting the next deal? At some point, and this is not just I'm not trying to put anybody down. It's growth. It's about maturity. At some point, you will take a few steps back and you'll say, what is my point here? And so, I try to do that self-analysis. I'm nowhere near perfect, but I take a few steps back and I say, okay, I can try to charge every single person $1 of value, but I don't. But does that mean that I don't get offers? I get great offers. Some of them I have to reject, unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons. Some I've accepted. There's more. I might have some opportunities to talk about officially in the future, primarily because of all these different relationships. But I keep it always open because I don't know what the future is going to bring. I've never met anybody that really does. And so if you keep your mind open, your communication channels open, you have opportunity always around. I mean, I no matter what I do, I can just turn left or turn right, and there's an opportunity. And that's only because you have to welcome it in your life. And if you think that your time is so valuable that you can't spend it but doing 3 words on a tweet, or you don't have time because you're so busy evaluating offers to talk to the random stranger in the street, you've missed 99% of your life. And it's hard for me to watch.
Yeah,
it really is.
You have to give that time out to the people who may not otherwise be able to afford it, or perhaps they're not in your same circle that you are. But just take a chance on them. Talk to them.
I mean, it's almost like angel investing with no money, right? If you're gonna invest in people before they have anything, you're investing your time.
The word I would use is, being pro bono about it.
Sure.
Let me tell you a quick story, and this became a big thing on Core. Somebody asked me, what is a quick summer job where I can make some money? And this came right back down to an individual that I was just sitting next to. I believe I was waiting for a bus. I don't remember. He was a homeless guy. And he turned to me, he goes, man, I don't have any money to eat today. And I go, you hungry? He goes, yeah. I go, what do you want to do with your life? Just like that. And he goes, I want to start my own business. I go, I will help you start your business right now. And he looked at me, he goes, how? I go, it has nothing to do with begging. You're going to be doing service, because the only way you make money in this universe legitimately is offering a service to somebody, period. That's what it always calculates down to. And he had this real gumption in him. So we walked across the street to Staples, and I said, let's get some stencils. I went across to the paint store. We got 7, 8 paint cans. And I went to Kinko's at the time, and we made flyers, 100 flyers. And I go, you're going to go up to every one of these houses down the street and hand out a flyer, and you're going to offer to paint their numbers on their curbs. And he didn't think it was possible. I go, I'm going to walk up to the door with every one of these. You're not going to be alone. But after that, you're just going to imagine me being there. And he did that. Well, what happened? Well, he charged $35, which I thought was too high, but he came up with that number. And he said, I'll probably have less, but I want to do really good work. And he wanted to outline the numbers. He actually got every single person on that particular block to say yes. Now, he didn't look homeless, and that's the other thing. He actually took great pride in the way he looked, which he sort of surprised me that he was homeless. And his backstory, I don't want to go into the big details, but it was a series of events. Long story short, that summer, and this was a number of years ago, he brought in $52,000 with him and a team of people.
What city?
This was in New Jersey. It was outside an area of Princeton, Lawrenceville area. And it was back when I was spending a lot of time in New Jersey. And he went up and down towns throughout the state. Now, in some towns, it's quote unquote illegal. So you got to check on this. In some towns, it's acceptable. Some towns don't allow.
Just to paint your curb.
No, it's illegal. It's illegal to solicit, and sometimes
okay, yeah.
And sometimes it's illegal to modify the curb. His job, I told him, was to go to places that didn't have curbs already painted, and to work with, the local law enforcement, let them know what they're doing. He later modified it to giving donations to charities. There's a certain percentage, but he did that for 3 summers. Guess what he's doing now? I can't tell you his name because this is just how it is right now. But he has 6 barbecue restaurants. He told me that day he was a chef and he lost his job, but he wanted to open up his own restaurant, and he saw no way to do that. And this was his VC. This was his angel investment. It was all of these people. And so if you go in his office, later on he migrated to these metal stencils, which are much more professional looking. If you look at the back of his office, a huge office now, he's got framed in this really great frame, these stencils. And he doesn't tell the story to anybody. And it's because he doesn't want, this whole thing, rags to riches. This doesn't want you to just figure out this is how I made my life. But he and I know, and I believe his wife definitely knows, and his kids know, that is how he got himself off of ground zero. So the opportunity is always there. And I think what this podcast is about us opening up the minds of opportunity, the people listening to us. Hopefully that's what I try to do on Quora is, a lot of people say, okay, some of your stuff sounds negative. And there's no doubt that the world has negativity. And the reason why some of it gets even more charged is because I'm trying to be very strong about the fact that there is a tremendous waste of time and talent doing the wrong things. And how can you learn what is wrong is to study the past.
Brian, I'll even say, like when you and I first came in contact and I was working at Zing Checkout, we've been building software for small businesses, their web-based point of sale software, one of the first players in. And I remember reading a bunch of your Quora posts, being so inspired, reaching out, you adamantly just gave us a call and we spoke for like 3 hours the first time. And I remember just the excitement in your voice. You were this older figure that had a lot of success earlier on, and now you're contributing back to the world. And it made us feel like we were doing the right thing. And it just gave us additional momentum to just plow through any problems that we had. And I think if you multiply that effort across 100 or, multiple hundreds of people, like that's a really special thing. And it sounds like that's what really drives you.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike, and it's my rocket fuel, and
sure.
It is, and I tell you, a lot of people are thankful for that.
So, Faisal, what have you gotten out of the show?
Oh man, I tell you so many things. I'm a bit stumped for words right now, but I learned a lot. I mean, for sure, just learning perspectives from you and Brian has helped me immensely because some of the questions have not been covered on Quora, or some of the topics have not been discussed in that much debate, especially when we do the pre-show talk that we do, sometimes the post-show. So that's one. Second thing is it's helped my profile immensely. I mean, now I actually get a mail or two every now and then, but I heard this on the conversation in your podcast, in the conversation with Brian, you were debating this, or you were debating this with Mike, or you said this, can you elaborate on it, etc. So the profile has expanded. One of the things is made me think about many things that I've said. I mean, I go back every now and then. I replay a previous podcast and just sort of take notes, etc. So it's given me a better perspective for research. Look at some things that I'd not thought about before. I'm not actually looking for a return per se, because I believe in contributing, be it content, be it written or audio, what have you. So that's my pro bono thing. I mean, I love contributing. I want people to be able to, even if I just get one convert, so to speak, that's good enough for me.
So what gets you? Faisal, what gets you excited? What are you are you excited to land a consulting gig? Are you excited to hear people say, Faisal, I changed my whole life and my startup because of what you wrote and what you said? Is it saying, someone says, hey, I want to give you a small advisory share and have you help me advise me on this company that's going to be huge one day?
No, I would be, it would be conniving of me to say that that's the ultimate goal or that's my, hidden agenda. No, it has never been that thing. Any advisory or consultancy that has come in purely from Quora and LinkedIn, or by a referral. This show I do because I really like doing it. I really like talking about it, and I hope that as we go, we go through the versions and the maturity of it all. Towards the end of the year, which is about 27 weeks away now, we have a show that is truly reflective of the kind of audience that we anticipate is listening to, the kind of audience that is available on Quora, who look up our questions and our answers, that we are able to make a difference, and that the show gets enough traction that it's talked about elsewhere. That to me would be the ultimate thing. Other shows talking about it or
what are some of those? What comes to mind when you think of what would be successful for Around the Coin if it gets talked on? We had Brett King on the show with Breaking Banks. That was a big deal. But also conferences. Do you look at particular hosts of other shows? Where do you see as a couple of pinnacle goals?
By merely mentioning that I'm one of the co-hosts of Around the Coin and people get it, that would be great. Right now it's not there yet, but I think it'll get there. So, like when I said Planet Money by NPR, you both instinctively knew what I was talking about. So I guess when we get to that same stage, when I say, or you say, or anyone else cites that, have you heard Around the Coin? You say, yeah, of course, it's my weekly thing. I always do it.
So Faisal, I've actually heard so many people that have come back from me just hearing your perspective. I mean, do you find yourself just learning more and more about payments because of the show? Because it just seems like every week you're just especially on Quora, that you're just getting more and more dense with your information, more deeper insight. Has that been motivating you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what really motivates me is, and has changed me, something maybe Mike would be happy about, is his 1 hour of learning post that he did. Usually I would learn throughout the day and, in gaps, 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But I have now started designating 3 days of the week, 1 hour each, where I just do my learning. I switch everything off. So it definitely has improved me in my learning process. The questions, the guests that we had and their perspectives, the perspectives of, when you make a comment or Mike would make a comment. There's so many things I'm absolutely oblivious to, so I have to go and read up on them. And absolutely, yeah.
I'll give you one of my secrets, and this has been for a very long time, is audiobooks have profoundly changed my life. If I didn't have audiobooks to help, because I don't have as much time as I'd like. I mean, I try to complete between 6 and 12 books a week, and that I can't always do. But audiobooks
that sounds insanely high.
It is actually much lower than it used to be. If you ever come and see my library, it's only 1/10 of what I have.
Are you reading them, holding them, or all audio?
No. I try to read as much as I can because I really like that. But sometimes I'll do something very strange, and Jeff Bezos probably figured this out. There's a lot of us out there. Is I'll do audio and then I'll do Kindle, and I'll vary between the two. But the thing I particularly love audiobooks that is read by the author. There's something profoundly powerful about that. And whenever I got gaps, I'll just throw a headset on and I'll just take 3 to 5 minutes of an audiobook, and then I'll have dedicated time. But that fills in a lot of my off moments. And so audiobooks are a powerful thing. Audible, the Amazon company, if I could put a plug in, had a tremendous program that they've extended for their very early listeners. You get 5 books per month for some ridiculous. I think it was
Brian,
like $9.99 or something like that.
Kind of brings me to an interesting topic, though. You know, the ability for you guys to both write as much and as dense and often as you do is not to be taken lightly, right? You know, first of all, you have to have the knowledge, and then have the time, and then have the dedication to do it. I think we've covered sort of the second and third, but how do you guys look at learning, right? Like, Faisal, how do you dig into all of the knowledge in the world, process that, and then put it on Quora? Is there a technique you use? Do you talk to people?
I'll give you my secret. So it's no secret after this.
Exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I do is I used to go to all these, various websites, and I used to, search for articles, etc. But over the years, I learned Twitter. I found Twitter. So what I do is I've got some hashtags, that I sort of monitor, and I've got a column for each hashtag on my tweet deck. So I have a column for Bitcoin, I have a column for money transfers, for banks, for banking, financial, money payments. I have about maybe 30, 35 columns. And what it does is over the day, it just, goes and gets anytime there's a hashtag, like let's say Bitcoin is mentioned, it'll show up in the feed. And I'll just scroll through the feed. And what is important is actually retweet it. And I'll just go over there and favorite it. And I use IFTTT for my thing. So whenever I favorite it, it goes into my Evernote. And then at the end of the day, just go to my Evernotes, look at all the things I favorited, and then read them. So I'm sort of using crowdsourcing. What people are retweeting and tweeting and is obviously of importance. And that's when I sort of, just say, okay, nice article. Just, if it seems even remotely interesting, I'll just favorite it. Comes to my Evernote, read it offline later on.
Wow. And what about historical knowledge? What about things that,
Oh, but I love that. There's a gentleman, and I must mention his name. His name is Chris Skinner. He's from the UK. He's a payments expert, payments guru. Perhaps you should get him on the show. He's a really funny guy. And what Chris Skinner does is he reads, he's the one of those guys who actually goes and reads all those 500-600 page books about the origin of money or origin of banking or, the history of Swiss banking, etc. And then he writes some beautiful, condensed versions of that, so to speak, on his blog. His blog is called, I forget the name, but if you just search for Chris Skinner, you'll find it. And those are a treat to read, absolutely. It's an amazing, amazing perspective that he puts out on money and finance and payments. And, for example, the history of Swiss payments, how the Swiss get into banking. It's such a fascinating story. It's such a fascinating read. But the historic element is not easy. There's a question on Quora right now, which is, how did banking get started? And I've been staring at that question for about 2 weeks now, and I've been making my answer. I think it'll probably take me another 2 weeks before the answer is complete. It wouldn't be all that long, but I want it to be a perfect answer, near perfect.
Wow.
And you have to research. You have to go back you tap into various databases, go, cite your sources and everything, and be absolutely sure because, someone is going to read from this thing. And if the foundation of your answer is incorrect, you're doing a huge injustice to someone, to the person who will be reading it.
What does it usually take you to write, a good, solid, average answer for you? What, in terms of hours or time, preparation, start to finish?
Well, let's talk today. So I did, I think, 3 answers today. Took me 4 or 5, maybe 6 minutes each. Because they just, the answer, someone asked, how can, why isn't Bitcoin taking up greater adoption in Africa? Boom, easy. I knew what to say. But there are some answers, like there's a question out there in Quora is, how does the interchange affect if it's a debit or a credit transaction for the issuing bank? So that's a question that needs research. It's not something you can, instinctively I wouldn't know what to answer, but I need to be very careful if I cite it because the US perspective may be inherently very different from the UK perspective or, the GCC perspective. Yeah. So the Durban law makes it very different from, let's say, the prevailing law in EU. So you have to go and research it. And sometimes you actually have to sort of give up because you don't know the answer or you're not confident about the answer. So why even try to attempt an answer that is going to be totally wrong or incorrect? So you just have to give up and say, listen, I'll just wait for maybe someone else to answer it and I'll learn something today.
And do you think that's a better approach than just putting your subjective opinion, which may be wrong, and acknowledging that it may be wrong? Because I think people would appreciate that.
But it really doesn't do justice for me to put it's an opinion then. Fine. Everything else is also an opinion. But then I know and I'm confident that this is not even past the 50% confidence mark for myself personally. And if it's anything less than that, I wouldn't put it up.
From my perspective, first, I don't consider myself an expert in anything. I'm just a student. And that's a deep philosophical belief, because I don't believe you can ever be anything but a student. And I think that we're all here as lifelong learners.
Yeah.
And I think the moment you stop learning is the moment your life starts taking on a completely different definition. So, as we talked about history, I fell in love with history at a very young age, and which is one of the reasons why I got involved in payments, is just really getting interested in the history of money. And being able to dig up a Sumerian ring coin in that part of the world way before it became such a terrible place to be, and to actually hold, I carry it with me everywhere, a bronze ring coin that's easily over 5,000 years old, and to know that it was literally in somebody's hand when they passed on. The cuneiform that was found next to it was really quite modern in its context. It was basically talking about how many people had, it was a list of how many people had that coin that this individual knew. And he was, in a way, praising it and cursing it at the same time. One of these days, I'd love to give you a breakdown, but it goes on. But the whole thing is, money and value exchange has been with us since really the beginning of time, and it's what we call a transaction today, and it serves such a major part of our life because it enables to magnify what one individual can do. It's all that really money does in the end of the day. It also magnifies who you are. Right? If you're a jerk, you're going to be magnified more of a jerk. If you're a great person, you're going to be magnified more as a great person. And sometimes it brings out elements internally within you. And that's why this is such an interesting topic, because we can look at it just purely from the technology, and I love that, but we can also look at it from the philosophical constructs. And our ancestors are going to laugh at us maybe as much as we laugh at the puka shell era of money. They're going to laugh at how we saw money as digits on a screen and not quite understand why we wrapped up our life into getting a few more zeros to the left of the decimal place.
Brian, let me ask you.
Just get another zero.
Let me ask you a quick aside. If you were to say, and this is a fairly macro perspective, if the United States could change and focus on one thing from a government perspective to say, let's fix this huge problem. The money, not money transmitter, but the payment ecosystem has a lot of intricate problems and opportunities. But if the government were to focus on one and say, let's just double down and fix this, where do you think they would put their efforts?
Well, I think it's going to be ultimately understanding what a digital currency really means in the modern era, and literally biting the bullet of what that true disruption is going to represent. There's so many great sides of digital currency and so many dark sides of it, and it's going to take leadership to guide this.
So help push cryptocurrency through?
Not necessarily cryptocurrency. I want to get more meta than that and just call it digital currency and what it really truly represents. All forms of money is an abstraction anyway. And obviously the way that our economies have been building thus far have reached a bit of a zenith because of the amount of what we would call debt that's been accumulated on both personal and business and governmental side. I think we're going to live through an era of transformation on how we see what a currency is, how we see values exchanged. And that'll drill down to even the most microscopic levels. Right now, there's a lot of inefficiencies. Before 9/11, 95% of the checks that were written were put into the belly of the planes, commercial jets, and moving from one bank to another, to one Federal Reserve Bank to maybe another Federal Reserve Bank. The 9/11 grounding of planes actually had to change that law, and facsimiles of the checks became legal. And the reason why all of us get frustrated about why change within the payments world is so slow is because it is somebody's money, and it might be somebody's life savings, and nobody wants to take the responsibility of pressing the wrong button and it gets zapped out. Because today, as we exist, most of our net worth is in some database in somebody's computer somewhere, and it may actually come down to one computer, and thus we have to start accepting that the ability to do what is taking place inside of Bitcoin and to maximize the ability of what the blockchain can do, that could be transformative, because one particular database isn't required. It's distributed throughout everything, and so those elements are going to be within all aspects of business and government at some point. But I think leadership would change its direction. But you need to get in front. To lead, you need to be in front of it. You need to be able to say, this is where we want to go. In a fantasy, a John Kennedy moon landing sort of speech about the future of currency and the future of payments, if that was to take place in our generation, it would profoundly change not only the United States, but
Brian,
the world.
What is give me one tip, one specific thing. I really liked Faisal's IFTT Twitter to Evernote, and then goes back and reads them. What's the one thing that you do that is, you sit down on your computer, you're listening to audiobooks while you cook and drive, and you're writing notes in Evernote, and then transcribe that and have a friend read? Like, what's one process you think people would benefit from or be surprised to learn that you do?
Well, I think it might be surprising a lot of people. Most of my ideas, 99% of my ideas, I don't ever get around to. This was like, as a songwriter, 99.99% of the songs I've ever written, I've never recorded.
But what about the source?
Lyrics.
Okay,
so here's what I'll do. I'll use Siri. I'll use text to speech to text quite often for my notes. Absolutely.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And it isn't always perfect, but I love the idea that I don't have to transcribe. So before I had, really good speech to text, I used to just have audio notes, and I got thousands of them that I hope to go back one day and archive. And so as a songwriter, I use a lot of these techniques. Back in the early days, I used to have cassette tapes, and I used to have some lyrics that I thought about or some musical riffs, and I just throw them off on tapes and usually never get back to them. But now with Siri and text-to-speech, or speech-to-text, I'm able to go back to my real crude tools. Others use Siri into notes or into Word, not Word, iPages.
And use that to capture the idea, huh? On the
just
fly.
The ideas. But they're snippets throughout the day. So, and I try not to be rude about it. I'm particularly aware of, the heads down into my my iDevice. I'm on vacation this weekend, and I noticed that there's far too many people with their heads down, not even noticing that they're in paradise at this particular moment.
So you'll have a random idea pop in your head, press Siri, say, I want to write a Quora post on Bitcoin in bars or something, right? And then go back to it later.
Sometimes it's not so formal. Sometimes I'll just give myself 2 or 3 sentences, as the world is sirening. I have sirens going off here. Sometimes I'll give myself 2 or 3 sentences, and it'll spark an idea. Or like Faisal was saying, he'll see a Quora question, and sometimes I'll just mention that I've seen the question and give a few of my ideas. And be frank, some of my longest Quora posts, maybe 30 to 50% was composed by just me talking.
Really?
And
wow.
Yeah, and then I have to edit it sometimes. Sometimes I don't.
Do you have an editor that goes in and looks at it before you post them?
Oh boy, I wish. I mean, I not only need an editor, I need a spell and grammatical checker. Basically what I try to do is I try to find the core ideas. My belief is if I'm going to write a longer post, I try to distill it down to 5 core ideas, but I try to elaborate around those core ideas quite intently. And I try to also break it off into bite-sized pieces as much as I can. I used to get really sensitive to the fact that I, should give a summary at the top. But a lot of my readers would tell me, cut it out with the summary. We'll make our own choices and go that route. And some of my more famous longer posts, I actually do text to speech, and I'll put a link there, and you can actually click on it and let somebody read it back.
That's awesome.
It's one of my recommendations to Adam and Mark over at Quora was to do on-demand text to speech, so that people like us who multitask, you can just click on it, let it talk in the background. I use this British sounding, which probably added to my mystique back before people heard my voice, a British sounding text to speech. I think it was one of the things about iPhones. It went to Forbes magazine, and it got on Slate. It was all over the place, and it was so long. So I just put that click to have it.
So we have a few minutes left. Let me ask Mike, your thoughts on where the podcast will be going in the future. What do you plan on bringing in or doing to it? It'd be nice to have your perspective for the readers, for the listeners rather, to understand what's going to be coming over the next 27 weeks before the year is up.
Definitely. And I think of it as, as we first defined in our mission, let's make this as interesting and inspiring to entrepreneurs who are thinking about the payment space, but are hesitant because it's so intimidating, right? Let's sort of break it down by categories and get people insight into what we think about it, particularly you guys who have such deep knowledge about it, and say that, look, you can really do something special here. So I think what ways can we make it as interesting and engaging as possible? A couple of things we've done this year so far, as we're 25 episodes in, are we've had about 6 or 7 speakers come on the show from CEOs of large payment companies, Ripple. We've had other podcasters, Brett King, on the show, and I think those are great. And we want to continue to do those maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, maybe once a month. But also what I'd like to do is start to engage, and we did sort of the first experiment with it last week, where we had one of the viewers, actually a good friend of mine, pitched me on an idea that he was thinking about leaving his company to do, right? And we talked about that sort of group payment exchange, and we pitched it on the show. We want to get a yes or no out of you guys. Whoever is pitching it gets a yes or no, and we sort of talk about it and spend a good 5-10 minutes digesting that idea. And I think if we can expose sort of what his bumps in the roads, what his opportunities may be, it might literally change his life, right? It might literally be. So I want to
commercialization.
Monetization, making money. So to date, in the sake of transparency, I think we've spent out of 25 episodes a total of $600 on the show. So we're roughly at 200 each.
Wow, we're breaking the bank.
Which, it's kind of amazing, right? You can go almost 6 months into a weekly podcast and showing it to, by now tens of thousands of total listeners have tuned in to across all the shows, and it's cost us $600. And we have someone else who does the editing. But we could look at monetizing.
And not to mention, we paid in Bitcoins.
Yeah, paid in Bitcoins. What I think might be interesting, right, is maybe open up just a donation through Bitcoin or Dogecoin and say we'll have an account for the podcast and say if anyone would like to donate. I mean, our costs are so low that
we'll do a shout out.
Yeah. I personally don't mind spending a couple $100, but if we want to grow it and be something bigger and do more with it, we might open that out. Maybe just encourage people to donate and have the link on the bottom of each post.
I think it's important. And this is the donations I've gotten from Quora. I'm blown away on how generous people have been. Just to say, keep writing more about this. Keep informing me.
And another idea, we could start to. I will do that. And another idea I think to get people involved would be throughout the week collect questions. So if there's 10 minutes at the end that we want to reserve for either an idea that we pitch or just to say what's general questions you guys have, right? What are people wondering about Bitcoin? I think if by happenstance we happen to talk about that, that's great. But let's try and really narrow in. If I was listening to the show and I want to know, God, will you guys just tell me, will this work in Singapore, or how does this work in other countries?
We'd love to do. So Lionel from Des Moines, Iowa, has a question.
Exactly. Yeah, and maybe we open it up
Yeah.
each show by answering some of those questions, and kind of getting the ball rolling.
Well, we're really tilted towards entrepreneurship. I mean, just by virtue of who we are and our obviously the direction of our audience. So, I mean, my words are just come with your ideas. We're not cruel here to try to knock it down. I mean, I think there are many opportunities that are just in front of me. I mean, if I had more hours in the day.
Let's talk about those. Let's dig in, Brian, because people want to hear that. They want to be inspired. People have the ability. They just don't have the knowledge that you do. And I think maybe the second half of the year we'll spend more about, rather than just about talking about our own knowledge, because I think we've covered the bases in terms of a lot of different categories of things. Sure. We can start to say, let's get more people involved. Let's make it a more engaging show for the second half of the year, and maybe come out of the second half of the year with a 3-4 times bigger viewership. I think that would be a fantastic goal.
I could leave it at this. I would say.
Not sure if we lost, Brian.
I think we lost Brian, and I think on that note, we should end it.
Yeah, sure. All right, guys. It's been a great one. We'll have this up soon.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.